Hello, nobility of the Butler universe. First off, thank you for your support. I am, of course, Nathan P. Butler. You already know that, otherwise you wouldn't be supporting the Patreon, I'm sure. And this is our monthly exclusive Q&A. This one is for the month of March, using any questions from February, and of course the year is 2018. Be nice whenever we get to the point where this has gone on for so long that we have to distinguish between, say, like October of 2017 when this all started versus October of 2018 when we finally hit a year into the Patreon. This one should be pretty interesting. We've actually got 3 different sets of comments, or 4, kind of, because one of our people who have left some questions actually left one and then left a follow-up. And that gives us a little bit more meat to deal with this time. It's been fun the last few months dealing with the comments from Chris Locke as they've grown, because it's been able to make these videos sort of an ongoing conversation in some respects. But it's nice that alongside Chris's comments this time, we also have some more folks who are taking part. So let's get into it here. Your exclusive Q&A here for March. Our first comment for response comes from Jonathan Pickens. Jonathan says, how do you feel about the fact that the movies have relegated current expanded universe material to basically just supporting material? I always get the feeling that nothing of consequence can or will happen, because, as is the case with any of these universes that tie into a bigger, more profitable media format, the movies, television, etc., there are no stakes for the main characters. Also, what are your thoughts on the cast of second-tier characters they've built so far? The old EU spent years building up many of its supporting cast, like Jason, Jaina, Coran Horn, Mara Jade, etc. I'm not quite getting that same sense of cast build-up so far. I thought Iden Versio was a decent start, but I don't think we'll be seeing many more stories for her now. I've heard that Ray Sloane shows up a number of times, but those are the only 2 notables that come to mind so far. Granted, my current canon reading is quite behind. I'd like to hear any speculation you might have where they might take the franchise in the new EU. So, of course, what he's talking about is this general idea that in the story group's new canon, whatever you want to call it, Disney canon, canon with a capital C, whatever, they are tending to put the major events in film and at times on television rather than giving us major events that actually happen within the books, the comics, the video games, and so forth. I think you're right, Jonathan, that the main reason why that's happening is that there is that bigger, more profitable format out there. I would say it's also the more visible format as well, not just because it is visual, TV, and movies, but because it's what people tend to associate with Star Wars. Like, you ask somebody, hey, what's Star Wars right now? They're going to tell you it's those things, not those things over there, right? For the most part. Even though right now what we're being told is that it's all of equal canonical value. Supposedly. We certainly have some contradictory things every now and then already, and the whole idea of novelizations being underneath, but that's, I guess, kind of a separate idea. But I think you're right. They want to make sure that everybody who is watching the movies, or watching the movies and the TV shows at least, can understand what's happening without needing the background of the books. And to an extent, that's kind of what we saw back with the original Legends continuity, right? You're expected to be able to understand the Clone Wars without needing previous other material or side material that was being published even at the time, like Clone Wars Gambit or something like that. You also were assumed with the prequels not to need to have followed the EU at all in order to understand the prequels. What happened, though, is that we had kind of a weird scenario here. I mean, most franchises, they exist, they end, and that's it. If they're lucky, they exist, they end, and then there is an official continuation of some kind until that eventually ends. Buffy the Vampire Slayer with the comics, Angel with the comics, Serenity/Firefly with the comics, and that sort of thing. It is extremely rare for us to see an instance of, okay, the franchise is done with the main stuff. Here's all this continuation stuff, and now the franchise is back. Or at least in situations where the stuff produced in between, the stuff that was meant to be the official continuation, was actually given credence that way. I mean, after the Star Trek original series was off the air, tons of books and stuff. And then came Next Generation, and there was a question of how is this going to fit? Well, they never really promoted the books as an official continuation. They were just a way to get more Star Wars stories when there was nothing on TV. They were spin-off material. They were licensed works. But they weren't an official continuity or a canon on par with or even subordinate to but meant to be in line with the show. And Star Wars wound up in that weird position, though, where the expanded universe was thought of as this is the official continuity. Lucas will not be making any more films. It was a shock when he finally came out and said, yeah, I am going to make the prequels. We're like, what? And then it turned out that, oh, you know, I didn't say nobody could make any more stories. I just said I wasn't going to make any more stories with the Disney buyout and eventually episode 7 and onward. So we have this instance in which the stuff produced in the middle wasn't just spin-off licensed works. It was the continuity. And as such, with the idea that they didn't expect it to ever return, or at least if it returned to be such a long way away, they were allowed to do those big things. The Thrawn trilogy, big event. Dark Empire, big events. New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, big events. Fate of the Jedi, big events. Not as good, but big events. And getting all this background of big events, Tales of the Jedi and so forth. Eventually Far Future with Legacy, and on and on and on and on. And I think those existed within that caveat of, this is it. This is the official stuff. But know that if Lucas or somebody ever does come back, it could get squashed. Which is what happened with all the stuff at Clone Wars era, some stuff in relation to the prequels, and now what has relegated Legends to being Legends instead of being the official continuity now that there's a new canon because of the new films and TV series that are happening right now. But at the time that they were allowed to do those big momentous events, there was a realization that chances were it wasn't going to continue. I mean, even with, say something like Legacy, right? Or Fate of the Jedi, Legacy of the Force. They're produced in an era in which the thought was Lucas has made his 6 films, and now he's claiming he only ever was going to make those 6 films, so he's done. Nothing after Return of the Jedi will be produced. Have at it. Do your momentous events. And then comes a need to basically shatter all of it. So what's happening now is kind of the opposite of that, which is this knowledge that yes, yes, there are going to be more films. Yes, there are going to be more TV series. And as such, we can't allow these big events to happen in those different media. Because the audience can't be forced to know that this book story, this comic story, whatever exists to understand the films. And I would argue there's a way to give momentous backstory to things that are mentioned in passing, for instance, in a film. That certainly is possible. That you don't need to understand how it happened in order to get it. I take the example, I wrote about this in that article for the Blade Runner book. You don't need the 3 Blade Runner short videos to bridge Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. But they help provide crucial background that is interesting and it helps you understand the universe when you're checking it out. The Blackout episode, or short film, whatever you want to call it, that bridges those 2 films is actually some pretty important events and gives you more context for events that are mentioned as important past events in 2049. But did we need to see that to understand 2049? No. You can do a story that way, not a problem, still a momentous event, and yet not necessary. It's not keeping your audience from being able to understand everything. And to be fair, they were doing this before the buyout, before Story Group Canon, like with Dark Horse and Star Wars Volume 2 with Brian Wood. Just let him do whatever the hell he wants, even if it clashes with other continuity, because accessibility. Or let's have a story, oddly, by the guys behind The Expanse. That is a fantastic novel series and a great TV series. Let's have him write a Han Solo story that means jack in the grand scheme of things because accessibility. Now it's just something that is more broad, and you're seeing it everywhere. So it is constraining them, but it doesn't necessarily have to. I think that it's partly that they're constrained by that. But they're also partly constrained by this idea that they don't know what happens in between. They have no idea what's coming next. The story group and the idea that they are the architects of the grand scheme of Star Wars and plotting these things out and making sure everything fits together does not seem to be what's actually true. It seems instead that the story group is there to kind of provide suggestions on connections and answer questions and help guide the product line generally as a whole, but they don't really have a plan in mind. I mean, they told Rian Johnson, here's some basic things that have just happened and we're kind of thinking might happen and ways we can tie this into stuff, but write episode 8 however the hell you want. Hey, J.J. Abrams, write episode 9 however the hell you want. We'll find a way to make it fit. And when you're doing it that way, without a grand scheme in mind, that is not to say that Dark Horse and Del Rey and them always had a grand scheme in mind. They certainly didn't. At least not always. But when you don't have that grand scheme in mind, you never know when the next movie is going to come. Like, oh, well, we may do a movie at some point that's between Episode 6 and Episode 7, and we'll just make it a Star Wars story so we don't have to come up with a decimal number. Or, you know what? We can't tell the background of this character because we might do like a solo story, right? Or solo a Star Wars story and tell the background of that character in this other movie. Can't do it. Can't give a lot of Snoke background. Maybe that's where we're going to send the guys behind Game of Thrones when they make their movies. They're so sort of playing it close to the vest to make sure that they don't trip on future storytelling options that they're hindering their storytelling. You see the same thing with continuity. Just write your comic book story. We won't actually pin it down, right? The Lando story. When does Lando take place? Lando takes place between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. Awesome. When does Lando take place? You can't just give us a 3-year stretch and just say it's somewhere in there. That's asinine. But that's what they're doing because they want to not tie the hands of future writers. And if we've got to pin it down, we'll pin it down. Instead of we are pinning it down so that everybody knows what the hell is going on and can use that context, it's, we'll figure it out if we have to figure it out. Otherwise, hell with it. And the end result of that is the same kind of thing. This sense of, there's like a nebulousness to it, but there's no plan. The plan does not seem to, the plan seems to be like, we're going to have this many books a year. We're going to have this many comics a year. We're going to have this many movies, and it's going to alternate between numbered movie and a Star Wars story. It's a business plan. It's not a storytelling plan. And when you do that, you can't do momentous stories that might impact future projects in the big media in the small ones. I'm actually kind of shocked that we ever got the Battle of Jakku in book form, because you could have seen that as Jakku, a Star Wars story. And if that was something that they could have done in 2025, they would never have given us Jakku in Empire's End or Lost Stars and given us that backstory. They're really kind of playing this close to the vest, not because they have a grand plan, but because they don't know what they want to do yet and they don't want to pin it down. They're the person who's not willing to get serious with this person because they want to play the field, because what if a better girl is out there somewhere, a better man is out there somewhere, or whatever. And by whatever, I mean scenario, not whatever compared to man, woman, just to make sure, because people are very PC right now, like, oh my god, what did he say? The person. You're not pinning it down to a person, because you don't want to get locked into something when there may be something better out there, or a better approach you could take in the future, whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it's a sad thing, because what it means is the books and comics we get usually are either character studies, which are interesting, at times, or we're getting stories that don't feel like they really matter in the grand scheme of things, and that don't seem to really impact each other as much. We do have characters that sometimes pop up in one or the other, or a reference from one thing to another, but it's not like a direct, heavy continuation. Like, you don't feel as though the Marvel series and Heir to the Jedi and Weapon of the Jedi give a shit about each other at all. In fact, the only reason you know what order they're in is to figure out exactly where Luke was in his Jedi training, and had he heard Ben's voice before, had he faced off with Vader before in person, to figure out the order of those stories, because the author sure didn't know what the order of the story was. The story group didn't know what order the story should be in. They're the ones saying, well, you can just use some clues and figure it out. And it means that this new canon isn't, at least from books and comics and video game standpoint, isn't going to be able to reach the heights that Legends did at one point, because it's not allowing those momentous stories. It makes sense why they can't, because of the other media. But it also is a constraint that is always going to sort of cast a pall on this continuity versus the one that existed before. I'd like to see some momentous events. I mean, give us a book story, a comic story. In fact, this goes into one of the other things that he said there about the speculation of where they might take the franchise in its EU in the future. Separate us from the films. Separate us from the main characters. Give us a side story somewhere that is all its own. Maybe it's in an isolated sector or something. It is Star Wars. It has all the hallmarks of Star Wars. It can be great, fun Star Wars adventure. But because it's in this isolated place, we can do what we want and have characters whose fates we don't know, who can have momentous things happen in that part of the galaxy that matter to them, that are huge, without having to worry about the impact on another film in the future, because they're so far off, we're not going to tell that story, right? To use an EU perspective on this, or a Legends perspective on this, it'd be like saying we're going to set all these books in the corporate sector, in the Taion hegemony, in Yuuzhan Vong space, in the unknown regions, whatever. We'll just have this story that can have full storytelling freedom to do the big things without having to worry about the other material. But again, from a business perspective, they would sit back and say, yeah, but if we don't tie into the bigger things, not as many people are going to buy it. Oh, I got news for you. If you keep putting out crap like Phasma, for instance, or Legends of Luke Skywalker to just tie into something so that it ties into something as a marketing thing, and people realize the stuff you're putting out is garbage half the time, and it's just being bought because it's connected, people will stop buying it eventually. Except for us diehards who need it for like the Star Wars Timeline Gold or something. People wonder why you received a review copy of Legends of Luke Skywalker. Why haven't you posted a review of it? Because I'm not sure how to do that without pissing off everyone because, God, that book was awful. Anyway, so there's that. As far as the supporting cast, I do think we've got a decent supporting cast being built. It's just they're not being used in that sort of connective tissue way as much. Chelly Afra is awesome. 000, BT1, 000 more than BT1 because you kind of need 000 for BT1 to make sense. Good stuff there. Ray Sloan, seeing her as a backbone of the Imperial side in so many different stories as her rank grows, as her position grows. Good stuff. Snap Wexley, to an extent, and the Wexley family, to an extent, being able to be there as connective tissue. But you're right, there's not a whole lot of these characters that are coming from the books or the comics, not from the movies or TV, that are getting to be the new Mara Jade, Corinne Horn, etc. And I think, again, part of that is, well, what happens if we tell a movie story that's going to have these characters in it, but they've worked really closely with these other characters or just from the books in these books? Shouldn't that character show up on film? Aren't we requiring that writer to use a character that wasn't in the movies before and have to do book research? Well, yeah, you probably are. But if you're going to say it's all connected, to use a Marvel turn of phrase, still Disney, then you are at times going to have to do that. I'm kind of shocked that it turns out that Thandie Newton's character in Solo isn't going to turn out to be Sana Starros, because that would have been a perfect way to make that connection possibly. But I don't know. I mean, the characters that they're creating in some cases are compelling. I think Afra in particular, very compelling. But they're just not using it as that sort of shared universe type of thing. And part of that also, I would say, and this is my last thing to say on this, part of it would also be the fact that, remember the way that the original Legends continuity grew? For a while there, it was like this event after Battle of Endor. Now here's this event. Now this event. Now this event. Okay, we'll fill in this one event over here, but now this. And you could see it sort of building towards the future. And it was like every year, every couple of years got a big story arc. But because they were building forward, at times they were able to more heavily reference each other and build off of each other until you get something big like New Jedi Order that has all these years of previous publishing that they're not really going to go back and fill in much more of, so they can build on that as a foundation for the next. Legacy is a perfect example of that because it kind of built on everything that came before. And when you are bouncing around, both with your movies and with your books and comics and such, or you're restraining them to one little teeny tiny time period, like most of it being between A New Hope and Empire, you're not really going to have as much of a chance to have characters evolve over time in a steady progression to become those new mainstays. That's why, let's say, Ray Sloan is probably really the only one who's getting a chance to do that, because she has made sense to be in these different time periods that they could fit her into. So we see a character evolution. We see her as a backbone because she is there so much. But even Afra is still confined to a fairly small time frame. No matter how much she interacts with other characters, it's all within a few years stretch. We have no idea about Afra, say, around the time of the Battle of Jakku, for example. It's just not there. Their approach isn't fitting that goal at this point. Our next two items come from David Ray. I'll go ahead and treat them as separate items to be able to keep the topics apart, unlike what I just did with Jonathan's, where I kind of hit everything all in one giant shot. And can you hear this squeaking? It's not an old chair, and it's squeaking like mad. Anyway, David says, first, so now that The Last Jedi is out, Nate, do you think we'll see more of the 30-year gap between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens? Flesh it out in novels, games, comics, maybe even a new TV show. I think maybe once we get Episode 9. Because there's still too many things they might want to connect with Episode 9 backwards. You know, like, maybe we are going to get more information about Snoke, even though he's dead now. Maybe we are going to get more information about the First Order than we got before as far as their founding and early activities and such. It's kind of like, at least it seems to me, that it's kind of like what we saw, for instance, with the early Marvel stuff, where it was basically, okay, and I'm talking like the earliest Marvel stuff, where it was basically, okay, we're not going to go past Return of the Jedi because they're still making these films, but now that Return of the Jedi is out and we know that the films are done, sure, we can build off the top of that. Why not? Or the prequels, to some degree. We're not going to mess around with a certain era, like, say, around Phantom Menace time. Now that the movie is out, we can feel free to build around it because we kind of know the context that the movie is created. Since we don't yet know the context that's going to be created by Episode 9, I don't see them doing that yet. But I would say that once Episode 9 is out, if it turns out that they say, okay, well, our next movies are going to be way far in the past, way far in the future, somewhere else, it's not going to rely on this same specific cast and their exploits, then maybe we'll start to see that gap filled in. But if it turns out, for instance, there's going to be an Episode 10 that focuses on Rey again, maybe we won't get that filled in. Again, I think it goes back to what was talked about in the response to Jonathan, where it comes back to this question of where do they want to go with future films, and it's like they don't want to take away their options for future films or TV series. So unless they are positive that something's not going to be touched in the future, they're not really going to allow it to be touched. And it concerns me because we wind up with a couple of different issues that are arriving. Aside from the fact that we just don't know when a lot of stuff happens. We have issues like, for instance, take storytelling style, right? The stories that we get don't wind up being very impactful, like, say, Phasma. It's a background of a character, but it really doesn't tell us much about anything in terms of galactic events at all, right? And it seems as though it's kind of a scattershot approach. I will forever be frustrated, it seems like, by Before the Awakening in the Poe Dameron comics. Because Before the Awakening does not appear to leave nearly the enormous gap between that story and Force Awakens that has to now exist because of all the stories they're doing in the Poe Dameron comic line. So it's one of those things where, yeah, this is the backstory of the movie. Ooh, we're going to do some more backstory of the movie. Just scoot stuff aside. Just move it. Don't worry about it. We haven't pinned it down to an exact month or an exact year anyway because we just don't do that shit anymore. So here, we can just move it and fit some more stuff in. You do that enough, and you start to hurt the integrity of that era from a chronological and continuity standpoint. And the best way to avoid it, unfortunately, is just not to touch it. At least until you know for sure that nothing else is going to impact that era. I think that they've learned their lesson, and it's both a good thing and a bad thing, but they've learned their lesson from the Clone Wars. They've learned their lesson from Lucas. They learned their lesson of, hey, we're going to have all Jedi fade into the Force. Wait, now we have the Phantom Menace, and George is saying they don't all disappear into the Force? What the hell, man? Oh, we have Jedi who are married. Wait, now Lucas is telling us in Attack of the Clones Jedi can't get married? What the hell, man? And so on and so on. And in Clone Wars, right? We have all these stories for the Clone Wars. You told us that we could fill these in. You gave us the nod to fill these in. Look how great a job we did. Now you're going to make a TV show and shatter it? What the hell, man? You take all of that stuff, and it gives them the lesson of, we got to be careful not to create future contradictions or the potential of future contradictions by playing in an era we might want to play in again later. But isn't that to some degree like, you know, I might want to eat this snack later, so I'm hungry now, but I'm not going to eat it now, and it runs the potential of the food just going to waste if you don't eat it in the future? I don't know, it bugs me, and it's weird, because as I'm saying this, the thing that pops into my head, rightly or wrongly, is a song that I was listening to in the car the other day. So, we've got Sirius Satellite Radio, right? In fact, I need to be careful because I need to transfer the subscription that is still technically on my totaled car onto the new car, which you can't do until the new car's little trial period is finally done. I need to do that in a few days or I'm not going to be able to listen to anything. But there's this new station called Pop Rocks on Sirius XM, and it's like 1990s rock songs that became pop hits or whatever. So I mean, it's the kind of stuff that I listened to all the time back then, so I'm digging the channel. But they frequently play that Somebody I Used to Know by the guy whose name looks like Goatee, but it's not that person. Or that band, whatever. And it reminded me of Star Wars I Used to Know by Israel something. I should say it. I should look it up here. But it reminded me of the song that is basically George Lucas and Darth Vader talking about the future of Star Wars and stuff. Who is it? Israel Curtis, I think is the person? Yeah, Israel Curtis. Star Wars I Used to Know. So I downloaded it back on my phone after buying it ages ago and started listening to it in the car again. And it's, you go back to the whole thing about George Lucas, and it's Star Wars will be done my way. I don't care what they have to say. And I'm kind of thinking that that's sort of the approach that Lucas took, which is, you can play in it, but it's going to be done my way, so when I come in and do what I want, you're just going to have to deal with it. And it's like the story group is trying not to let that happen again, to be George Lucas in that sense, in this era. But they're playing it extremely cautiously. They are the abused spouse who, now that they've freed themselves from the other spouse, will not allow themselves to get into another relationship because they're afraid that that person could become an abuser in the future. They're trying to avoid a future repeat of past problems, but are so cautious in doing so that they're avoiding future opportunities. And because of that, I doubt we're going to get much to fill in that gap. I think it's going to probably be a while until we finally do. Though when they do, it'll probably be huge. Huge news, huge publishing venture, maybe even some multi-book series or trilogies like we saw in the past. David also asks, also, Nate, what do you think about the new copyright that Lucasfilm did for the name Star Wars Resistance? And that it's the same wording as the copyright they did for Rebels. I would not be surprised if Resistance is the launch of a new Star Wars TV series once Rebels is done. It could be a new product line in general. Because, you think about Rebels, Rebels is a TV show at its heart, but you've also got the books and the comics and stuff. You've got even comics that are being produced in Germany that aren't being produced in the UK, so they're not being automatically translated and able to be brought over here for me to be able to read, because I can't read German. You have, like, the whatchamacallits, these things over here. These things. You have the Cinestory comics, right? So you have an entire product line based around a TV show, which kind of goes back to where that copyright all plays in. So I would hope that it's probably a new show, because that might actually give us some of that gap filled in, or maybe something, I don't know, between 8 and 9, perhaps, that gets filled in, because there's not really any time between 7 and 8, that maybe gives us some of that background that they seem unwilling otherwise to tell us, but we'll just have to see. It'd be nice, though, if it was, because at least that would give us that background, and that would take off the table the whole wariness of, well, what if we want to make a TV show or a movie out of it later? Well, no, this is the TV show. So you can give it to us and actually know that you're not later going to step on your own toes, so you can actually do something with it that matters to the galaxy and gives us some of the background we've been clamoring for since The Force Awakens came out, or hell, since The Force Awakens was announced. But at this point, I'm kind of surprised that we haven't heard anything about it yet. Because you may recall that before Clone Wars ended, even when they announced that Clone Wars was ending, part of that announcement was to announce that another series was coming soon. It took us a little while before they gave us the title of Rebels and gave us any details, but even at the time we knew there was something coming to replace this that is going to be going. And it doesn't seem like we've really gotten that relative to what's going on with Rebels ending. We got some slight hints of, Dave Filoni will move on to something new or something like that, but nothing that specifies even that there is a new Star Wars cartoon coming. Unless, of course, maybe it's not a cartoon, maybe it's a TV series, because there is the talk of multiple Star Wars series being in the works for Disney's future pay-to-access streaming service that will be sort of a Netflix or Hulu just for Disney, more in line with, say, CBS All Access than a Netflix or a Hulu. We are getting to that point now where you're going to probably wind up paying for a lot of different streaming services in order to get the content that you want. Though Disney is going to have Marvel stuff on it, in theory. It's going to have stuff for Star Wars on it. Of course, I'm all in on that. And still, I would still say that for those of you who aren't sure about cutting the cord, I think we still pay less than we do for cable. We've got Netflix and Hulu we pay by the month. We've got CBS All Access that we paid and a year at a stretch, so divided up by month to give you a sense of how that would amortize across the year, accounting term there. And we'll wind up doing the same thing for the Disney thing, and we're doing NHL to be able to watch hockey games. And I still think that when you take that down and break it down by the month, we're still paying less than we were paying for cable with a bunch of channels we didn't ever use when we had AT&T Uverse television to go along with our Uverse internet service. So, it may be worth it. It's just that there's that proliferation, like how many different streaming services can the market bear? And as long as they've got exclusive content, I think we'll be able to add a few more into the mix without the whole thing starting to kind of collapse under its own weight. But that's a U.S. thing, right? Our market and our streaming services are different a lot of times than other regions are. And finally, we come to a message from Chris Locke that continues our ongoing conversation really since these exclusive Q&A videos started. Quite a bit here again, so we'll just dive straight into it. Chris says, "Hey Nathan, so this month I wanted to share an experience I had not too long ago that opened my eyes when it came to how I want to collect Star Wars on home video. Woohoo! But first, let me say I took your advice and went back and started listening to Cloud City Casino, which I've been planning to, as well as Beyond the Film, so thanks for the push to start listening. And your hot dog analogy was great. And I've actually used that in real life already when talking about microtransactions. Just as an aside here, what he's talking about was I did an analogy about hot dogs and like a hot dog vendor who has changed his way of producing hot dog meals over time in order to meet changing tastes in society, but who hasn't been allowed to raise his prices because what the market will bear in terms of prices, what people expect in terms of prices of the hot dog meals hasn't changed, what their expectations have, as an analogy for the video game market and why something has to give somewhere in the video game market. Did that on Cloud City Casino in depth, and then in the video game year in review episode of Star Wars Beyond the Films touched on it a little bit also, just not in quite as much depth. So that's what he's talking about. Cloud City Casino, Star Wars Beyond the Films, those are the podcasts I'm involved with. The gaming one is Cloud City Casino with Michael Morris. The legend/canon books, comics, novels, games kind of thing, that type of show is Beyond the Films. That's with Mark Hurlman. That's what he's talking about. He says the hot dog analogy. That's what he's talking about. It's kind of the tell him about the Twinkie type of thing from Ghostbusters. In this case, you want to understand the video game market? Tell him about the hot dog. I'd say tell him about the wiener, but then, the congressman gets involved, and then he's involved with young people. No. All right, so to continue. When I started getting back into Star Wars, the only set I currently owned, besides a shelf of different versions of fan edits, despecialized editions, 16 and 35mm restorations, etc., was the 2015 re-release of the 9-disc complete saga set, the one with Vader on the cover. He's talking about this one, right? So I started picking up items, like getting the 2004 set primarily for Empire of Dreams, and the 2006 releases to have the last legal way to own something close to the original unaltered versions. I love that he says close, not that is the original unaltered. Yes. Through a number of bumbles, lost packages, and a good handful of delays from Amazon, I wound up getting my Blu-ray box set of the Clone Wars, and not only did it wind up not costing me anything, they gave me around $30 of credit for all the hassle and headaches. I started building onto the collection bit by bit, wanting to get as many of the DVD and Blu-ray releases that I could. Not sure if I want to go into VHS and other formats yet. When The Force Awakens and Rogue One came out, I was quick to get my pre-orders in as fast as I could afford to, assuring that I could get all the different American variants from Walmart, Target, Best Buy, what have you. I was surprised when you posted your From the Star Wars Home Video Library video about the new re-releases from Walmart that included the new slipcovers and the DVD of Forces of Destiny Volume 1, since I had heard nothing about a new release that was coming out, and after finishing the video, I hopped in the car and went to the local Walmart. Thankfully, I had been setting a small amount of savings aside for any unexpected eBay deal or something of the kind that would pop out of nowhere, so I could surprisingly afford them at the moment, given how many products they hit us with at once. Time out. If you don't happen to follow the From the Star Wars Home Video Library video series on YouTube, what he's talking about is that at the end of 2017, Walmart did this massive reissue of 7 different Star Wars products, some through 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment, some through Walt Disney Home Video, and it was stuff like the complete saga set from 2015, but with a new slipcover over the exact same product again. And it was basically about $200 worth of new Star Wars Home Video products all at once that was never listed on Walmart's website, never got any fanfare, was only on shelves for a very short time. It was one of those blink and you'll miss it types of releases that now will probably disappear into the Star Wars home video libraries of people, not show up much on the secondary market because they weren't bought much in the first place, and wind up being ones that cost quite a bit eventually when people start realizing they exist and try to get them off of places like eBay. I detailed them all back in a recent episode of From the Star Wars Home Video Library to try to get the information out there. And from what it seems like from the comments I've gotten back on it, most people had no idea that they existed at all. Only reason I knew was that Amy Bisson, who has been a Patreon supporter before and who's a follower of the YouTube channel, she noticed them and told me about them, and my wife and I made kind of an emergency trip around midnight one night to Walmart to grab them while we could. To continue. So there I am, 10:30 at night on a snowy Michigan December night at Walmart, wandering around their video section because, I don't know about your Walmart, but mine, you have a better chance of grabbing something blindfolded and it being the right item than you do actually finding something where it should be. I'm admittedly getting a tad bit frustrated, going down the same row of Blu-rays a fourth time, trying to find an employee to help me find what I'm looking for, when I finally get hit by what I can only describe as a moment of clarity, as I stop in my tracks and say to myself, in my head, I don't want to look any crazier than I probably already did at that point, why am I going through all of this? About to spend $200 plus to buy identical copies of the same thing that I already have, just because they have new slipcovers and a DVD of something I can watch for free on YouTube. That being said, if/when they release Forces of Destiny for purchase on its own, I will totally pick it up. So I headed home, reevaluating my collection, and basically had to remind myself that collecting is not about building what everyone else thinks your collection should be. It's what you want. I still want to collect iterations, the 2004 set, the 2006 set, that kind of thing, since there are actually different things in there. But I'm not going to focus so hard on every little variant of a film if there's nothing substantially different about it. I'm continuing to build the collection, though I've noticed that when it comes to buying older products, when it's possible to do so, I want to pick up things new as opposed to used, assuming the price gap isn't too insane. After having gotten screwed on a set of the original prequel DVDs that were claimed to be like new, but one look at the discs looked like the seller glued them to the tires of his car and drove cross-country. So trying to come to a point here, what are your thoughts on iteration versus variance? Have you had any nightmare stories when it comes to collecting Star Wars home video? And do you have any quirks or things that you're very particular about when looking for a new item to add to the collection? Thanks again. So I guess first off, let me say that the way that he's approaching collecting is exactly the right way to approach collecting, right? Which is, it's based on what you think your collection should be. It's based on what you want that focus to be. If you decide that you want just the movies, none of the TV stuff, that's fine. If you decide that you want every different version of everything, okay. If you decide you want just the different iterations of the films, and if it's just a reissue, you don't care, that's fine. It's all about personal preference. I mean, you're collecting things, as he says, it's not about what other people think complete should be. It's not about what other people think you should own. It's about what you personally wish to own. Like for me, I don't collect the toys, but I felt a compulsion. I must have Thrawn, I must have Jaina Solo, and hopefully in the future I must have a Cade Skywalker somewhere. But otherwise, you know, those two don't really have much in the way of companions, because to me, it's about collecting what matters to me. I started out with my collecting focus being focused on DVD, Blu-ray, VHS, and such, but then it expanded to include Laserdisc and Betamax. My focus was US. It expanded a little bit over time, but now I'm definitely trying to do things like the Blue Fan stuff from China or the premium MovieNext boxes from Japan. Not only can your focus determine what you collect, your focus can change. Because again, it is for your enjoyment. If you're getting to the point where the collecting isn't fun, then it's not going to be something you should probably be spending money on. As I said in, say, I've said this tons of times, but say in the essay in the most recent C-Card anthology, you know, if your fandom is causing you stress or undue burden, you're doing it wrong. You know, that should not be the way it is when it's supposed to be an escape and something fun. And collecting is the same thing. And those, for what it's worth, are pieces of advice that I also give in a saga on home video. I'm not going to read it to you. If you want a copy of it, you know, grab a copy of the book. I mean, it's all stuff that I'm sure you've heard me say before, just maybe not in the same words. But the last regular chapter in that book, and yeah, as it says, 3 picks, I'm already in the writing in a copy of the book that I've marked as review and revising so that I can kind of get a sense of what I want to do for a next edition, which again probably won't be until after episode 9 is on home video, so 2020-ish or something. But the tips I give for Star Wars home video collecting are your focus determines your difficulty, and the fact that you can always change your mind when it comes to what you want to collect. What is complete, that you define what a complete set is, not somebody else. If you think that complete for you is one of each release, fine. If complete for you includes the variants, fine. Like for me, I've got pretty much all the Star Wars novels and comics that I want as part of a collection. But I sit back and, I don't care about variants. In fact, where I have cared about variants, I'm about to not care about. You look back at these shelves back here, these ones that are kind of behind me, these are mostly canon stuff. But if I were to pull these out, you're seeing stuff like 2 copies of From a Certain Point of View, you're seeing 2 copies of the Force Awakens novel, and so on. For most of these books, I got multiple friggin' copies, because there's a Barnes & Noble exclusive, maybe there's a signed version, there's a regular one. No, I'm done with that crap. I'm done with the convention exclusive garbage, where you have to, get somebody who can go, and maybe they have to get into a lottery to have even a chance of buying it, or you just buy it off of eBay for triple or quadruple the price later. Screw that. I'm going to cut back, and in fact, a lot of the different extra copies that I've got, aside from signed ones and a couple of variants that I'm going to keep, I'm just going to sell those things off or do them as giveaways on one of the podcasts or something to get some use out of it and clear some friggin' space. Your focus can change, and what counts as complete is up to what you think is complete for your set. If you're defining your own collection, then part and parcel with that is defining what complete is for that collection. Let's see, when opportunity knocks, answer, dealing with, if you run into something that's, you don't think you can grab later and it's a good deal, you might as well grab it now. Know your limits. Always make sure that you're not stressing your budget to the point where you cannot handle it. That's why I actually kind of budget in a very specific, meticulous way in the old Microsoft Money program to make sure that if I am going to try to buy something, I can, or if I want to pre-order something, it's paid for, quote-unquote, well in advance because the money's already set aside. You got to make sure you're not going to put yourself and your financial health at risk. Budget, which kind of goes in with that. Don't expect prices to drop, because they won't always. If people aren't buying something, get it now, because that usually means less on the secondary market later. Search eBay periodically. Know what exists and what doesn't, so avoid being caught by bootlegs. Be aware of international options. Network with other collectors. And then the conclusion, biggest message of all, up there at the top, there is no right way to collect. It's all about personal choice. So he's doing exactly what I would advise, defining his own collection, making his own decisions here based on what is financially sensible and logical for him and how he defines his collection and what he actually is willing to spend the money on. That it's a compulsion, but it's a compulsion within limits. That I think is healthy collecting. So anyway, so we asked these questions there at the end about, first off, iterations versus variants. I feel like, getting back into it's 2018, so everybody has to feel, facts don't care about your feelings. Let me try this again. My opinion is, it seems to me that we have an overabundance of reissues in Star Wars, right? All the way back to, VHS being reissued over and over again without new content. Nowadays, it tends to be, hey, we're going to put out a product, and you're going to get the same disc you got before, but maybe we'll add something new to it to get you to buy that same disc again. And these days, it's not even a matter really of, here's a release now, here's a release later. Like, The Force Awakens has been released 4 times in the U.S., right? We had the original release that April, we had the 3D one that November, that holiday, we also had a release through Walmart of a special holiday version of it, and then the next holiday, this last holiday that just passed, we got another one through Walmart. And it's always been one or the other of 2 different sets of discs that we've gotten. It's either been the discs out of the 3D Collector's Edition or the discs out of that original release, depending on which release we were looking at. And when it's the exact same stuff over and over again, it can be very frustrating. For me, I do go for the variants and the reissues because of this. Because it's what my collection is sort of morphed into over time. And because I want to be able to educate people on it. Like, and that's the same thing really for the Star Wars Timeline Gold for me, right? I'm a teacher. So by heart, I want to spread and share information. I want to enlighten and engage. And if it's something I'm passionate about especially, I want to be able to get other people into it as well and have those passionate discussions, you know? So for me, part of building my Star Wars home video library, which is crazy disorganized right now, by the way. You see these shelves over here. They're not even remotely, you know, sitting spine out anymore at all. So they are a mess because I needed to move them around to make more space. But part of that passion in getting those things is to have my own collection, but part of it also is the sharing of it, the educating about it, and that takes book form as well as otherwise. Same thing with the books and comics. I'm getting them all, reading them all so that I can put them on the timeline because it is a resource for fans, though for how much longer I don't know because just a lot of stuff to keep up with, and I'm pushing 40 at this point. Not that 40 is old, but I've been doing it for 20 years. And we're moving towards the 21st anniversary. At some point, something's got to give sometime, doesn't it? Maybe? Anyway. So for me, variants are all right. But I think there's a big difference between, like, here's a Best Buy exclusive, a Walmart exclusive, and a Target exclusive. And then there's the regular versions. Or like with Last Jedi, here's a Best Buy exclusive, a Target exclusive. Here's the 4K version, the DVD version, the Blu-ray version. Okay, those are choices when something comes out. But then there's also the variants like 1990 VHS box set versus 1992. Biggest difference is some slight packaging redesign and the change from CBS Fox Video to Fox Video. Or, hey, here's the special widescreen edition of A New Hope in its original release marked as CBS Fox. Now here's one where they fix some issues with the disc, and oh, by the way, now it's labeled Fox Video. And for me, it really is, I would say that what it comes down to is that if it's a variant that matters in the sense of new something big, wow, that was a bad phrase, but something new added into it, then I'm like, yeah, this will be cool, I'm going to pick it up. I still want to get the minor variants, but when it comes to the really, really minor things, it's hard for me to care enough to actually spend the money, even if I am talking about it, like, for the book. For instance, I'm about to do an episode of From the Star Wars Home Video Library here, probably in the next couple of weeks, that looks at an old library copy that I've now taken the stickers and stuff off of the CBS Fox Video regular narrow VHS case version of The Making of Star Wars and SPFX The Empire Strikes Back, which we've seen a million times, just not on that particular type of tape, or with that particular packaging. And it came to my attention recently that if you look back at 1982 and 1983, there are actually two different cuts that are made to the spine of the drawer cases. So one that goes around the corner and one that's just a little circular hole. And you can see variants of both of those in both 1982 and 1983. And if they exist as variants like that for VHS, they probably do for Betamax as well. So that means what? Between 1982 and 1983, 8 different copies to procure. At this point, I've got 2. One of Betamax, one of VHS. I don't really care that much about, I'm going to go get this basically because the copyright date on the back has changed. And that's it. Or there's a slight difference in how they've cut this hole. Would I get it if I ran across it at a decent price? Sure. But am I going to hunt it down? Am I going to pay out the nose for it? No. Like right now, when it comes to the quality of what it is that I've got. Like I've got that bonus lightsaber action DVD for the second time that they've released it, except mine has a little tear in the cardboard on the front of it, where it's just got like just white because the cardboard top layer has torn. Well, I can get that off of eBay right now because somebody is selling the original toy with the DVD in it. But they want like $160 for it. I don't think that that little DVD, having a better case, a better cardboard slipcover for that, is going to be worth $160 to me. On the other hand, I'd be willing to pay quite a bit for, say, you know, yet another variant copy of The Force Awakens from Nova Media from South Korea, which, by the way, I just did, so you're going to see that on the show soon, the Nova Media one-click set from South Korea. So, it just depends, you know? But I think, again, it's not so much that, I don't want to say, you know, damn you, Lucasfilm, damn you, Disney, 20th Century Fox, whoever. How dare you do these as cash grabs? Because, you know, as an econ teacher, anything that you produce as a company is to be able to make revenue, right? By definition, everything is a cash grab, basically. But the fact that they keep reissuing it, to their mind, it's another chance for people to perhaps buy them if they didn't buy them before. It's another chance for profit. But they are theoretically going mostly after a new market of buyers. Because there's only such a limited number of us out there actually trying to buy every single thing, that we have to remember that if we're not the target audience, we can't get mad when we've got these other releases out there that now we're like, oh my god, now I gotta collect them, right? And to an extent, I even have to criticize my own criticism of Marvel for that, to a degree. Although, I think comic collecting is something that is known as a collecting thing much more than home video collecting is, to be fair. So, I kind of criticize my own criticism, but not entirely, because when they put out Star Wars #1, the new Star Wars #1 for Marvel a while back, and they had over 100 different variant cover versions of it, that was asinine. And I got pissed, and I've ranted and raved about that being bad for consumers and bad for collectors. And it is, if you are a collector trying to get them all. But if you're just an everyday person and you just want one copy of it, you now have all kinds of different options to choose from. Go for it. Pick whichever one you like the best, right? It's giving you more options. And to their mind, they're probably looking at it as a combination of both. Haha, there's all these options out there. We will get more people to buy it because they might see something attractive to them that might not have been on our product line if it was more narrow. Hey, that's the ticket. But they're also probably thinking, and the collectors will buy them all. More money, more money, more money. I don't think the home video companies are thinking that as much because there's not as much of the collecting around it. But there's got to be at least a little bit of that to a degree. So it's one of those things that you can criticize, but I think usually when we are criticizing, we aren't the target audience for it. It's kind of like, getting pissed off at the quality of Ewoks. And Ewoks Season 2 was garbage, and Ewoks Season 1 wasn't all that much better. But I have to be able to be intellectually honest enough to recognize that I was not the target audience for Ewoks. Well, I mean, maybe I kind of was back then, but not now. Like, me as an adult looking at Ewoks, I wasn't who that was made for. So why am I going to get up in arms about it at this point? I don't know. It'd be nice if every time we got a new Star Wars product, it was something truly new. But I don't see that as something that's very likely to happen. They're going to try to get as much profit out of these different films that they have the license rights to as possible, and it happens. I mean, what would be the alternative? Only every once in a while we see it on home video and then it disappears for ages and doesn't come back? The Disney Vault approach? Do you really want to make it so that there will be a span of years in which you just can't find a new good copy of a particular Star Wars movie because they haven't actually released a new reissue in decades? I don't know, and how is that going to help the fan base grow? So, there's that issue. Did I say ashu? I'm not sure what an ashu is, unless that means toilet paper, right? It's not a tissue, it's an ashu. No, anyway. Second thing he asked. And you'll notice that I don't cut out a lot of my stupidity sometimes on these videos, so I kind of feel like, along with the honesty thing of kind of getting into deeper thoughts, you all understand me, I think, better than others. Otherwise, why would you be doing this highest tier on the Patreon, right? You kind of get a sense of my personality and who I am, and you don't see anything into it other than just what it is, which, he's not meaning to offend people. That's just him. He's just kind of like that sometimes. Imagine what it would have been like to be in my traditional classroom whenever I used to sometimes slip into Kennedy voice or Clinton voice and such as we were doing lessons in those particular time periods. Do I have any nightmare stories when it comes to collecting Star Wars home video? Nightmare stories. I'm looking over here at the collection to see if there's anything that stands out as a nightmare story. I don't think nightmare per se. I've had some bad experiences, like products being damaged in the mail. Like, I replaced my Definitive Collection Laserdisc set from '93 from the US with another one that wasn't nearly as beat up, but the one place that it is beat up is a very noticeable ding on the packaging thanks to a bit of damage in the mail. I have run into getting Star Wars Movie Viewer cartridges that as soon as you cranked it, the film broke because it was so old. I don't think I've got many in terms of nightmares and things going wrong so much as there are nightmares of trying to get your hands on something because it is so difficult. Like, I think it would be a nightmare to try to get all those making of / SPFX releases from 82 and 83 on Betamax and VHS because of the whole, different cuts on the packaging type of thing. It is a nightmare to try to get a 1986 set of the Star Wars VHS and Betamax regular releases versus the ones from between then and 1988 or so, because the only way to tell the difference is the trailer at the beginning of the film or after the film, and usually an eBay listing isn't going to say so, and chances are the person selling it may not even have a working VHS player to check. Trying to get all of the cards from Droid Tales, right? Lego Star Wars Droid Tales, where it had those little packs of 3 cards, and each time the 3 cards were the same 3 cards, except there were 3 sets of 3 cards, so they wanted you to buy the thing at least 3 times in hopes of getting you to get all the cards. I've just gone on eBay and grabbed another set of those 3 cards that I didn't have before, but I'm still missing one of them. I may never get it. It has been a nightmare trying to get Ewoks Volume 2 from the UK on VHS. Please, if you ever run into that, let me know. Or grab it and then sell it to me. It's just one of those things where, again, your focus kind of determines your reality. Your focus determines your collection. And there are things that I've sort of learned to let go because it doesn't matter enough to me to go through the frustration. So I don't go through the nightmare so much as I sort of recognize the nightmare coming and say, you know what? That is not worth it to me. It's not worth it to try to buy a ton of different copies of identical-looking VHS tapes from circa 86 to 88 in hopes that when I put them in my player, I'll find that I've got complete sets, some with the trailer in the front, some with the trailer in the back. It's not worth that to me. And do I have any quirks of things that I'm really particular about? I'd like to be able to have things with their slipcovers if they originally came with them. So there have been times I've repurchased something to get a slipcover when I already had the product without one. That happened with one of the Spaceballs releases, for instance. I really am particular about making sure that it is legit, that I'm not looking at a bootleg, and that I know what I'm getting. Like, whenever it came time for me to think about picking up those Blue Fan sets, I wanted to make sure I knew what the heck I was talking about or looking at before I made any purchase whatsoever. Because I can always examine it once I get it and research it once I get it and know more about it to present on the show or in the book. But before I buy something I'm not at all familiar with, I need some background. And thankfully, Brian Snook is an awesome resource when it comes to understanding steelbooks and things like that. So I kind of talked his ear off for a while, and thanks to him, I was able to actually get those and know what I was looking at. I actually have the other Blue Fans, The Force Awakens, on the way to me right now. That isn't that world exclusive art. It's just the worldwide art with a slipcase that's an only at Blue Fans OAB release that we'll see on the show. Same thing with the Nova Media stuff. And I want to make sure that what I get is as complete as possible. There were 2 auctions. Actually, there's multiple auctions, but the 2 I was looking at on eBay that had about $100 price difference to get all 3 of the South Korean Nova Media steelbook with slipcover versions of The Force Awakens. And there's these little things that come with it, these little slipcovers, PET slipcovers they call them, and these little magnets that go on the spine that are lenticular. And there was one auction that said it had the slipcovers, showed it nowhere in the tons of pictures that they showed. Another one said it had it and showed it, but that was the one that cost a little bit more. I was willing to pay a little bit more to guarantee that that is what I was getting and nothing would be missing once I got it, because I only want to buy the damn thing once, instead of, as I have in the past, sometimes having had to buy things multiple times to get all the pieces. Like the first time I can think of that was the Toys R Us clamshell case thing for the Phantom Menace. When I first bought it, I didn't realize there was a little lenticular card. I wound up having to buy the stupid thing again to get the lenticular card. So I guess everybody kind of has their own quirks. You know, everybody's own collection is determined by their own tastes. I guess the only other thing I would say for me that is quirky, though, is that I want the releases that aren't necessarily thought of as home video. Like, I want the DVD from, called A Musical Journey, from the Revenge of the Sith soundtrack. I want the DVDs, so I'm going to have to get the limited edition versions of Sculpting a Galaxy and Dressing a Galaxy. I want the DVDs, so I'm going to have to buy, toy packs that come with the DVDs, even if I then sell the toys off. I want those DVDs. So for me, I guess you could say that's kind of a quirk, but it's less to me a matter of quirkiness as a focus of a collection, because in essence, that is what quirkiness is, right? Kind of, maybe, sort of. And then every one of us out there, I could say, I've got the best collection, it's the best ever, because you define what best is, right? Or something like that. All right, that wraps up all the questions for this month. This has been an extra long Q&A thanks to those questions, but hey, that's cool to me if it's cool for you. So be sure, if you want to put in any questions for next month, that you drop them into the collection thread that is labeled as March 2018, and then those questions will be pulled for the April 2018 Q&A video. Thank you all for your continued support here as members of the nobility of the Butlerniverse there on Patreon. And thank you, of course, to Jonathan and David and Chris for putting in the questions or the comments that allowed this episode to be possible this month. Thank you all again. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you in a month.